Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey, welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast. I'm your host, Darren, and what we're all about here at Touch MBA is helping you make the best MBA investment. That means finding MBA programs that fit you best. I'm using the word best a lot. And of course, after you find those programs, giving you all the tools to help you get into these elite MBA programs across the world. This week is episode number 196, and I brought on Bridget Pujals, who came to us in 2020 for some free school selection help at touchmba.com, and we stayed in touch, and it's amazing. She just completed her MBA application journey. She'll be headed to UC Berkeley Haas's full-time MBA program this fall on a full merit scholarship. How did she do it? What are her best application tips? What other schools was she considering? And in the second part of the conversation, we also talk about Bridget's work at Postmates and at Facebook/Meta as a product manager, a very popular and desired career option right now. So I asked Bridget about what someone can do to break into product management at a top tech company like Facebook, or even at early stage companies. So I think those of you who are interested in product management, entrepreneurship, and of course, getting into the best business school you can will enjoy our conversation. Bridget is very open about her journey and the challenges she encountered along the way. And I hope this episode inspires many of you guys to apply to the best fit MBA program for you, no matter what it's ranked. So let's get straight to my conversation with Bridget Pujals. My next guest was recently admitted to Harvard, Wharton, UCLA Anderson, and Berkeley Haas, some with substantial scholarships. And I can't wait to learn from her journey. She came to us back in 2020 to get some school selection help. And we'll dive into what she was doing back then. But Bridget Bridget Pujals.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here.
Did I get your name right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Oh man, after all that practice, that did not go so well, but it is. I'm just so excited for you to be here. You obviously have amazing results, and we're going to dive into that and what you've learned through your entire journey. But first, maybe we can start with just telling our audience a bit more about yourself and your career, and when did you realize you wanted to get an MBA?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so excited to be on the podcast. I think the MBA journey can feel really lonely. And the Touch MBA podcast was sort of my first friend and buddy throughout the process. And I learned so much through other people's stories. So I really want to share my own story because everyone's story is so unique. So I think I started thinking about getting an MBA during my time at Facebook, now called Meta. One of my mentors, one of my closest mentors at Facebook, got his MBA at Berkeley Haas, and was so inspired by just the way he approached problems, way he broke down problems. That was sort of my first indication that maybe this would be a good degree for me, even though I was already a product manager at Facebook, which, you know, a lot of people get MBAs to get the product management job. So it was a big question mark, like, you know, is an MBA the right fit for me? But I started thinking about it at that time. And then I just started going down this journey of learning what are the different archetypes that go get MBAs, and what can you use the MBA to accomplish, and how can an MBA support me in my goals? And my goal is really centered around entrepreneurship. And I've been on a journey to figure out what is the flavor and what shape should entrepreneurship take for me. And I really looked into, do I want to be a solopreneur? And is time my most precious resource? Especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we were starting to see people working from all around the world. And I was really inspired by that. And so initially I thought, maybe I want to be a solopreneur and have my own coaching practice and work from Bali. But we can talk more about that, but that has evolved how I see where I want to take entrepreneurship and how the MBA can support me.
And, just to give our listeners a little more context, you studied biochemistry at UC Irvine. Is that right?
Yes. So I was I was a pre-med major, and I thought I was going to become a doctor. I did 300 hours working in a hospital throughout undergrad, and toward the end, I realized that I didn't want to go down the path of doing a residency and going to med school. I thought it was a really long path to start having a major impact. And because I grew up in the Bay Area, I grew up in NorCal, I had been exposed to the technology industry from a really young age. My dad's a software engineer, and technology was always in the back of my mind as this other industry that was really interesting to me. And when it clicked that I didn't want to go down the med school route and I didn't want to become a doctor, I moved back to the Bay Area and I started looking at high growth technology startups, because I had grown up around it. I knew it was there, and I knew that I could have an impact immediately. Yeah.
And then your first job was with Postmates. Is that correct?
Yes. So, rewind to 2014, Uber and Lyft were growing really fast. Uber and Lyft were becoming.
I remember those days.
You remember this time, right?
A lot of cheap rides. Rides.
Yes, cheap rides. And I even remember, friends of mine thinking that they could make a lot of money by becoming Uber and Lyft drivers. This was back when you could make a lot of money as a driver. So I was fascinated by that. And so on my short list of tech startups it was really like Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, and Postmates. Like those were the companies I was looking at. And ultimately, it was a great fit with Postmates. The people, one of their values is eccentricity. So the culture was this really fun, whimsical culture, and it really clicked with me. And, not to say anything about the other companies, but it just clicked with Postmates. And I was like, give me any job I'll do any job. I'm a pre-med major. I don't have any experience with sales or biz dev or anything, but I can do it. Just put me on anything. And so they said, hey, we're growing really quickly. We're just going to put you on this new thing we're doing. We are trying to start this program, this sales program where we go and convince restaurants to pay us money. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So, I really started my journey working in sales and doing cold calls, and slowly but surely started to work on bigger and bigger deals. So, one of the deals I worked on was the Starbucks partnership with Postmates. And I just got on bigger and bigger deals. And I really made sure I was a top performer in that function, because I knew if I were a top performer, I could parlay that impact to another role if I wanted to. So I was really just building optionality for myself and working really hard, nights and weekends, so that I could transfer. I basically figured out that product management was what I wanted to do. I wanted to connect the dots between the sales team and the engineering team. So being on the sales team, I was going out and trying to convince customers to pay us, but sometimes we wouldn't be able to convince those customers to pay us because we were missing features that they wanted. So I really it started to click for me that as a product manager, I could work with the engineering team to build the features that the customers wanted.
Yes.
And in doing so, I could make the sales team more successful. So that was really how I started to realize how exciting product management was. And I told the head of product management that I wanted to transfer. And over the course of, maybe a year or so, I was able to make the transfer.
Amazing. So that is one huge topic that I definitely want to come back to, careers in product management. And you've done all sorts of stuff there with Postmates, Facebook, and your own organization, which we'll get to. But so I'm going to rewind and take us back to you're at Facebook. You're inspired by the mentor or boss that you had that went to Haas. You started thinking about MBA. what was the process like? Did you just start looking at schools and what they offered? Or did you look more internally? I'm just curious, like how that evolved for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not saying this because I'm on this podcast, but I seriously, podcasts like Touch MBA, I'm trying to think if there were other ones, but I started just researching what programs are out there. I did, of course, look at the rankings, although I have so many thoughts on rankings.
Let's hear them. Let's hear them.
I mean, so look, I went to multiple admitted students weekends I went to Harvard's, I went to Wharton's, I went to Berkeley Haas, and on the plane over to go to the one for Harvard, I met people that were deciding between MIT Sloan, Stanford, Harvard, Berkeley, tons of schools in the top 10 in the United States. And the reason I think that the internet would have you believe that the cultures are like wildly different at these schools. But because I was sitting next to people on the plane and interacting with people that were deciding between these programs and having such a hard time deciding, it's like, I think that the cultures are not as the culture differences are perhaps not as pronounced as you would think. So I think that rankings should be taken with a grain of salt, and even rankings within the like sub areas of emphasis like entrepreneurship. Right. And of course, there are like the employment reports and, placement into a given career path, like, placement into technology. You can compare Haas and Wharton on that, for example. But I think it comes down to like your personal, are you vibing with the professors? Is the location right for you? And really location is very important.
Yep. No, absolutely. So it sounds like it can only be done through this kind of in-person contact, which you had, right?
Yeah,
at these admitted
I think
weekends,
so.
or seeing if you vibe with the professors and the people in your class.
Yes. And we alluded to this earlier, but I actually think one of the biggest like tiebreakers is knowing your own priorities. So for example, like I knew that entrepreneurship and starting my company was the most important thing. I knew that I didn't want to wait until my second year or even like post MBA to make progress on starting up. And it became really clear through the admitted students weekends that it would be almost impossible to start up during my first year at Harvard. And for anyone listening, it has been done. People can do it. I don't want to say impossible because that's hyperbole, but through talking to students, it was made clear to me that it's very difficult to start a company or make any meaningful progress during your first year at Harvard because it is so rigorous and so, involved.
So, yeah, I mean, first of all, I think everyone who's listening to this can see that, like, okay, you know what you want to do, but you're also going after something extremely ambitious, which is to start a company while you're getting your MBA. I mean, an MBA is already, even if it's not Harvard, so intense and so demanding, not only intellectually, but socially. And then we all know how difficult it is to start a company.
Yep.
So, I mean, why? Like,
Yeah.
why does it have to be now for you, Bridget, as opposed to after your MBA or even 5 years after your MBA?
Yeah, no. And I think like life throws unexpected curveballs at you. I can't predict the future. Like maybe my experience in 8 months, maybe I come back on the show and I was completely wrong about how realistic my goals are. Like, so I want to acknowledge that I've never done an MBA and it's impossible to know how I'm going to feel. But I think that part of the reasons I chose, part of why I chose Haas was they integrate so much of what you're doing as an entrepreneur into their electives and into how you spend your time. And there's, Berkeley Skydeck is this amazing hub for tech entrepreneurship, which is what I'm focused on. They have an accelerator for student-founded companies called, Pad 13, which is part of Skydeck, but it's a specific part of Skydeck for full-time students. So in terms of, I'm avoiding your question, which is like, why? Because that's a totally different question. Why does anyone do anything? I think actually the easiest answer is when I was thinking about what shape my next chapter was going to take, I read the 4-Hour Work Week and I thought really hard about like, what would my life look like if I went to go live on a beach in Bali and had, my own, I was a solo entrepreneur. I designed my own schedule, and, maybe I make 5 figures doing, being a business coach or a career coach for high net worth individuals. Who knows? So I looked down at that path and I thought to myself, that's exciting, but that's not right for me. And the reason it's not right for me is, yes, I value time. Yes, I value flexibility, but there was something missing in that path, which was using technology, being on the bleeding edge of what you can do as a human being on this planet. And for me, the way to be on the bleeding edge is to create the new ways of doing things and be involved in the new technology. And there's just no substitute for me personally. There's no substitute for actually doing that work. So that is why I basically looked down the path of, you can go have a successful business that is not doing a tech startup. And I really actually lived in those shoes for a while, because I did take on coaching clients. I started Junie, which we'll talk about. And I could see this as something that I cared a lot about, helping women advance in technology and break into technology and get promoted in their roles. And it is something I still do to this day, but there was something missing. And the missing element was solving really difficult problems using technology and scaling that to something that is affecting people on a global scale.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the most important thing is you took action to see what it's like, to actually be in those shoes.
I investigated it to actually see what it's like.
Yeah. You can't read a book about that. You have to, it could inspire you, but the doing is where you really learn. So how much did that big picture goal that you just explained to us, how much did that factor into your applications to all these schools in terms of your career goals?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I think it factored in quite a bit, because there are other top programs like, Kellogg and a couple of other top programs that when I looked at there's a really great website. I think it's Veritas Prep, where they break down, what is the school known for? What is their, how do they place graduates into various fields? And when I was breaking down programs, I created my shortlist based on schools that had this combination of, they place a lot of people into technology, a lot of graduates into technology. They're known for having a strength in technology. They invest in their entrepreneurs and founders. They have, clear accelerator programs. And so it factored a lot into, me creating this short list of 6 schools that I applied to. And then it also factored a lot into my application. Honestly, it was the lens with which I looked at my entire application was, can I leverage this program to launch my company? And that was what I wrote about in my essays.
Mm-hmm. And so let's go through some of the points that you felt were really important for you. And we jotted some notes before the call, so we're going to go through these. And I love the way you kind of just phrase them quick and short. So talking to students is helpful, but there's no substitute for knowing your priorities.
Yes. I heard that advice early on, go talk to students. And I'm going to be a little contrarian here and just say that these students are going to tell you that you can achieve your goals at the school that they're going to. And they're all amazing people, and they'll be really honest, and they'll listen to your specific situation. But if you don't know what you're truly trying to get out of the program, if you're undecided, it is almost impossible to get, good data from these students. So there's really just no substitute for having a one-on-one with yourself, going on a long walk and figuring out your motivations and figuring out what you really want to do. Because I talk to a lot of prospective students who are torn between multiple career options,
Yes.
Venture capital, maybe they want to be a startup founder, but they're not sure. And I really advise people to get clear on what they want to do before. And of course you can change it after you start.
Yep.
But you really, really, really ought to know what you want to do.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Did those conversations help sharpen that focus for you? Or do you think it was really that long walk, that moment of clarity, and then you could really approach people like with,
Yeah. I think that the entire process of the entire application process helped to sharpen it for me. I'll give you a concrete example. So I took the GRE 3 times. And like, look, I'm so proud. I didn't think I was going to get into Harvard. I got my GRE score up to a 328 combined, 98th percentile verbal, 70th percentile quant, 5.5 on the written. And that was not easy. And so to give you a concrete example of how the process sharpened my goals, I asked myself many times, am I really willing to do this really hard thing of doing an MBA and starting a company? Because that's really hard. Yeah. But I have proven to myself that I am willing to put in the work. I'm willing to put in the hours. And the proof is in the results speak for themselves. I retook that test 3 times. There were many times that I wanted to give up or thought that it was impossible, but it's the people that persist and push through those dark moments where you doubt yourself. Those are the people that succeed. And I think it showed me how determined I really am, because I almost gave up the GRE and the GMAT. Like, it is no joke.
It is no joke. And I'm so glad you shared that, that it's hard. And this was one of your points, right? Applying to these schools is hard. I mean, yeah, we do feature successful students here on the podcast, but it's a grind. And I really appreciate it.
It is a grind. It was 2 years. It was a 2-year grind to make this happen. And so it's like, now I get to say, oh, amazing. I was accepted into Harvard. I got a half ride to Wharton, but you don't hear about the 2 years that went into that.
The 3 GRE tests and the retakes and
the crying,
being frustrated
like,
with your
my
scores.
Husband. Yeah. And it's a strain on your relationship. Actually, this is something that I think it was in one of your podcasts where you mentioned this, but it is hard on your relationship to study for 2 years and even to go do the MBA and to do a startup. It's really something you have to be very sure about.
Absolutely. So, I mean, maybe one sort of implicit point in this is start early, especially with those tests, because then you might need some multiple retakes to get the score you want, right?
Yeah.
So another point you mentioned, start essays early. This pays dividends and it reduces studying for the interviews. So how can you start your essays early?
Yeah. So I think the strategy that worked well for me was reflecting on my years of work experience and kind of breaking down, what did I learn along the way? What impact did I have? It's you can go through your resume and look at the impact that you've had, but you want to go one layer deeper, well, probably 2 layers deeper than your resume, and talk about why you chose the projects that you chose, why you chose the companies that you chose. And then, like, what was your role on that team, and what did you learn, and what was the challenge? So really just getting a document together where you start to distill your professional stories. And it's a lot like interview prep, and which is why I mentioned that it really reduces the time that you need to allocate towards studying for interviews if you do an impeccable job with, your essays.
Yeah. And I mean, how long did that whole process take you to go through? Because you had worked, you had worked at Postmates with doing sales, business development, then in product management, and then Facebook product management in 2 different divisions, if I understand that correctly. Yeah. So how long did that take? And like, how did you write it out? Did you talk it out?
I did. Okay. I did write it out. So let's see, how did I first start? I think I first started with just a simple prompt. The simple prompt was, what are the top 10 professional accomplishments you're the most proud of? I think that was like the prompt I started with. And I really just wrote, 10 paragraphs. So I didn't write like 30 pages or anything. I just wrote a paragraph for each of the 10. And then from there, I started to pull out like themes and patterns. For example, one pattern I noticed was this theme that became a theme for a lot of my essays around courage. Like, I noticed that some of the projects I chose and some of the ways I approached certain projects required me to advocate for something that like wasn't an unpopular, was something that was unpopular. And so I had to have courage and convince people why this thing mattered. And that came through as a theme across multiple projects that I worked on. So the task after writing out those stories was to start pulling out themes and really developing those themes.
Yeah. And so I think that's great to start with a prompt, start with your resume. So that's kind of like top down, right? Kind of thinking about, okay, your top 10 accomplishments or top 10 moments maybe that you're proudest of or that impacted you the most. Another way, just to give another recommendation, is to start bottom up. So going through your Gmail, I mean, Gmail tracks a lot or whatever your work email is. And like, because I have a bad memory. So I notice that sometimes like if I go through, right, like all the different projects I've done, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about, this client I worked with or this project I did that was like super special to me. But the idea is to kind of data mine your past. And then like Bridget said, like bring out those themes, right? That really unite those stories and accomplishments. So, okay. So start the essays early. One other point, get an advisor. So touch MBA assessment, work with a consultant or work with a mentor.
Yes. I think one of the best decisions I made in the process was, it was a combination of choosing my recommenders, doing, I think, a good job of choosing those recommenders who were able to double as sounding boards for my application. But also like working with a consultant was one of the best decisions I made. And I only knew to do that or even look into that because of this podcast. And the reason I think it was so helpful is it helped on like multiple levels. There was this foundational level of expertise on the process and how to navigate each step in the MBA application process. For example, step 1 is like the data collection. Step 2 is get your essays together and your recommenders together. But then step 3, there are these interviews that are like really hard to do. And so there's all of these steps. So level 1 that it helped me on was helping me navigate that complicated process. But then 2, getting a really experienced admissions consultant can just help you articulate your stories in a way that's more compelling. They can serve as a sounding board for you to just get feedback. So I found it really helpful. And I think for folks that are, younger or they're not able to work with a consultant, working with a professional mentor or working with your recommender is an amazing alternative to that.
No, absolutely. So I want to give a shout out to Paul Bodine and Admitify. Paul's been on the show before, and I think he's one of the world's best consultants. So I'll link to his site in the show notes.
Yeah. From the first time I talked to Paul, he just zoomed in on what made me unique, and it was just incredible to work with him. And the results speak for themselves, and I was so happy with the results.
And I think the key thing here is that, some people can see the consultant route as it's a big investment. I mean, consultants aren't cheap, but it's also people's time isn't cheap as well, right? Even if you're working with a mentor or a boss or someone who's gotten an MBA before. But I think the key thing is to invest in, your success by like building this team around you, right? That can help you, because you can't objectively evaluate yourself. I mean, as smart as I know many of you are, it's just hard. I mean, it's you haven't seen thousands of applications or applicants before. So I do think it helps to get an outside opinion very much. I'd also like to talk about, Bridget. Well, okay, before I get there, interviews. You said they're hard.
Yes.
I mean, how, you interviewed with 6 schools.
I did.
Right. So MIT, Sloan,
schools.
Stanford, GSB as well. I mean, that is amazing in itself, right? To get interviews at all 6 of these schools. How did your interviewing improve after like going through this cycle, right? Because I would imagine they would get easier.
Yeah. I that's what I thought too. Unfortunately, the interview formats can be quite different from one another. For example, the Wharton interview format is this group interview where you're interacting with people. In contrast, the Stanford interview is fairly casual. It's behavioral. You're answering a couple of questions on, hey, walk me through your impact on XYZ, professional thing, or tell me how you've shown courage at work. So very different formats. I think that I got a little more comfortable like doing the Zoom interviews. And for me, it was on Zoom. I wish they were in person, but they were still on Zoom. I think the interviews that are behavioral based, the later behavioral interviews were easier because I was able to like hone in on which stories I want to talk about. And I would say by far the hardest interview that in my experience, was the Harvard interview, because they know your resume back to front, they know your application back to front, and they are, it's an admissions professional coming into the interview, with not full knowledge of your profile and your application, and it's not behavioral. So that one, it's really, you really have to do your homework and make sure your answers are very crisp. It's also 30 minutes and they end promptly at the 30-minute mark, whereas, most of them don't have like hard stops. So the Harvard interview was, I think, the most intimidating and like nerve-wracking for me, but it worked out.
What was your preparation process like?
Yeah, for the interviews, I think it was just a couple things I did. Like one was I reread my application, I reread my essays, because there is like a 2-month gap, I think at least, between sending them in and doing the interviews. So I made sure to reread everything, because you want to refresh yourself with their curriculum and how, if you are applying to 6 schools, you certainly want to make sure you're talking about the right course, the right professor. You don't want to mix them up. And so I reread all the materials, and I would browse their program and just jot down what are the things I'm the most excited about.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would try to I had a conversation or two with alumni leading up to the interview. And I had more conversations with alumni prior to that, but just to kind of refresh myself and get any additional like get an insider view on the culture, I had 1 to 2 additional chats closer to my interview.
Yeah. And I mean, were those through your personal network, or did you reach out to people like that were current students?
Because I grew up in the Bay Area, I was able to use my network to find alumni at Haas and Stanford. But for MIT, Sloan, Wharton, Harvard, and to an extent UCLA, it was just reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Yeah. And luckily I was able to get in touch with multiple people at each of the schools.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I just think it's interesting to hear how people go about doing that.
Yeah.
And great tips there. And then in terms of the scholarship, so I know that, you received this full tuition merit-based scholarship from the consortium.
Yes.
At Berkeley Haas. Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so happy.
Yeah. I think anyone would be to get full tuition, right? Scholarship to Haas. Oh my gosh. And it's exactly kind of the type of program you want to be in, the location you want to be in, et cetera, that we've talked about. So can you talk to us more about that application process and why maybe you think you succeeded there?
Yeah. I became aware of the scholarship through my alumni chats. So, earlier I was saying you can talk to students, but there's no substitute for knowing your priorities. The, I guess, small counter or plug for still doing those alumni chats is, 1, it helps you with the interviews and the interview prep, but 2, you can learn about scholarships and your eligibility for certain scholarships. And what happened was I had a conversation with a second year at Berkeley Haas, and that student was listening to my story, listening to what I was working on at Junie, and they mentioned that there was this scholarship that I should apply for. And so I hadn't heard of the scholarship, but once I had that conversation, they sent me some links, and I started to read about the consortium, the Consortium for Graduate Study and Management, what their mission really is. And it clicked so well with the impact I was already having. Their mission is to promote the inclusion of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans in business. So I was like, this is amazing. I'm trying to help African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, and women like move into management and leadership roles. And beyond that, I was co-leading the Messenger Diversity and Inclusion Task Force while I was at Facebook. So it made so much sense to research this scholarship program and look more into it. And as I looked more into it, I learned that in order to apply, I would have to have a third recommender, which I didn't have at that time. I think this was like December. This is like December timeframe, December 2021, and I had to find a third recommender who could speak to my commitment to the consortium mission and sort of like corroborate the examples I was sharing about how I've shown commitment to the mission. So, I had to find a third recommender, and I reached out to my network, and I found one of the like executive sponsors on the Messenger Diversity and Inclusion Task Force that I worked with said, yeah, absolutely, I will be your third recommender. And so I was so lucky and fortunate that I found that third recommender. And then from there, it was really just a matter of, I had to write three additional essays, and I had to complete like an additional application online.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I just want to make it clear that you've been, invested in this cause for a long time, since college, right? Doing all sorts of stuff. So it wasn't, but I mean, oh my gosh, how amazing is it that you didn't even know about this scholarship, and then boom, you're like, oh, the consortium.
No, I didn't know about it.
And it just fit your past and basically a lot of your extracurricular involvement. Like that, but you didn't know about the scholarship.
I had no idea about it. And I should have, in hindsight, I should have done a longer like research project on the scholarships available, because there are other scholarships for women looking at graduate study in management. I think there's a Forte Fellowship for women. So there are a number of external scholarships to consider. And I highly recommend, if anyone is listening to this, please do a better job of researching what is out there, because it is absolutely possible to like leverage your volunteering and your involvements over the last 15 years of your life and show your commitment to a cause. Or maybe it's just, maybe it's because you are eligible because you're a woman, and it's worth it to look into it. And absolutely. I highly recommend people do that.
Absolutely. Every little bit helps.
Yes.
For your recommenders, like, can you share with us who you chose and why?
Yeah. Yes. So for my first recommender, this was actually really hard. It was a hard process because I had two managers that I had worked with over the last 7 years that I had kept a relationship with and I had kept in touch with. So there was one manager from Postmates and one manager, so one direct supervisor at Facebook. And so they were sort of my top picks. But one concern was that the manager I had at Postmates hadn't managed me for like 6 years. And so it was kind of a question mark. Is their feedback going to be relevant? Is it going to add value? Because it's not as recent as I would like. But I ultimately decided to go with that person because they were able to show how I operated in a startup environment, which is, and sort of like, wearing a lot of hats. And they were able to show a different side of me than the manager at Facebook who, working at a startup is very different from working at a large tech firm. And so they were able to, emphasize different parts of my background and my strengths.
Love that. That's great. Yeah. And so, I think that's so important. And did you have to do a lot of work to kind of refresh that previous boss's memory from 6 years ago about everything you did? Or maybe not, because it seemed like you performed very well, right, in that first role.
Yeah, I think like the foundation of the relationship was very strong, and I was just incredibly lucky because he ended up working at Facebook. So I was able to like get coffee with him, like walk over to his building and get coffee with him.
Wow.
So we worked at the same place, and then we worked at the same second place.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I was able to keep in touch with him. But I will say, I through coaching with Junie, I spoke to other women in technology that like weren't nurturing those mentorship relationships with past managers. So it actually isn't like, it actually isn't obvious to everyone how exactly to continue nurturing those relationships. And I think it is just so important, even if you don't want an MBA, to really take stock of who has been there for you as a professional and take the time to see how they're doing. And also, if you can be that person for someone else who's more junior than you, it's just so valuable to like keep up that professional network. So yes, I did have to refresh his memory. I created an entire what I called like a recommender packet. It was sort of like a 6-page document that had all of my professional impact, my stories, my resume, my MBA goals. If anyone wants a template, I can put it on my website.
Okay, we'll link to your website, so you better put it up there.
I will.
No, that might be maybe the biggest takeaway from this entire conversation, what you just shared about nurturing your past networks and staying in touch with people. I agree with that 100%. And that's a perfect segue to, what I want to talk about. Junie, why you started that, and then dive deeper into careers and product management. So maybe we could first start with Junie, what you guys do, why you started it, and what you kind of see as like the problem right in that space that you're trying to help people with.
Definitely. So we touched a little bit on this earlier in the call. It was around the beginning of the pandemic. I started to, think that I wanted to start on this entrepreneurial journey, but I wasn't sure what flavor that was going to take. I thought maybe I want to have my own coaching practice, and I want to scale that, and I want to be a solopreneur. I wasn't even like preoccupied with building out a team or anything. And I was just getting so many inquiries from women on LinkedIn, in particular women, but also from men too, seeking to pivot into product management and or wanting to get promoted within product management because they saw that I got promoted a couple of times. And I was having a ton of fun giving advice through, LinkedIn messaging and through just, random calls. But I felt that it would be a great idea to just get certified as a coach. So there's this institute that I worked with to get certified, and I became I actually chose a life coach certificate rather than like a career coach or business coach, because my thought process was you really need to take a holistic approach to coaching and mentoring. If you're working in technology and you're a woman, at some point you may want to start a family, and your life and career might start to kind of meld together, especially during the pandemic. Your personal life and your work life really started to intertwine and meld. And oftentimes, like, the reason why women aren't going for a promotion, it has to do with something going on in their life. So, I chose the life coach certificate so that I could really combine like life coaching and career coaching. And really, Junie it's my coaching practice. It's a coaching and consulting practice that I started and incorporated in 2020. And I worked on coaching while I was at Facebook, but really, did that full time once I left Facebook. And it was a really big question for me. Is this what I'm meant to do? Am I meant to lean into coaching and helping people advance in technology? Is that really what I'm meant to do? And so through that process, I started to feel like something was missing. And so I still continue to coach. I still do this today, but through the process realized that it was missing that element of technological innovation. And so for that reason, I'm not, that's not going to be what I continue to do and what I'm using the MBA to do. But
Yeah.
I'll just stop there.
I mean, so before we get into what you've done since Facebook, right, to kind of launch yourself into the Haas program, I'll call it that. I mean, it's hard to get a product management role at a place like Meta, Facebook. I mean, everyone knows about
Yes.
Meta and Facebook, but
They accept 1% of applicants into product management.
and boom. So I mean, there's a huge need, right, for your services. But I mean, if you could kind of give us a big picture, like sum it up, like what are some things that people, whether they're MBAs or pre-MBAs listening to this, like who want to work in product management, like what can they do to give themselves an edge or to help them break into that function, that very important function these days?
Yeah, it is growing. It's growing as a function. I think it grew 30% faster than any other, and this is product management and engineering grew 30% faster than the next fastest career in the United States in the last 5 years. So it is growing at a rapid pace. Technology is ubiquitous, and we need more product managers. And furthermore, we need a diverse group of product managers to build diverse and inclusive products. So it's so important. And what people can do, I guess the first thing to do is to ask yourself, is product management a good fit for you? That's probably the place to start. So you really want to be energized by working with multiple stakeholders and sort of translating the needs of one team to another team. You know, you're working across engineering, marketing, design, analytics, and you're working with a lot of different people. And one small like sort of pitfall or mistake that I've seen is product management seems like a role where you get a lot of influence and it's really exciting because you can have a lot of impact. But sometimes if you're a little more, introverted, or you thrive in small group interactions, but you don't do you don't prefer to work with a lot of people and focus on like communication, product management can be really draining as a career. It can actually turn out to be like, stressful or just not fun. So I think that's the first thing, is to kind of strip down the glamour and actually kind of ask yourself if that's a good fit for your personality. And then I think the second thing people can do is start to do product management before anyone gives you permission. So what that looks like is, learning about what it is and then doing a side project. So for me, the form that took was, before I got the official title, while I was at Postmates, I asked every single product manager, what project do you not have time for that I can do?
Oh, I love that.
Snuck in.
What a great question. What a great question.
I just snuck in and I just started just doing it. And I know this is like, I want to be sensitive because I want to be sensitive because you never want to undervalue yourself and burn out because you're taking on more responsibilities than you can handle. And I don't advocate for that. However, there's really just no substitute for learning by doing. And so the more you can just start a side project that you're really passionate about, it's just a great way to get started and also have fun while doing it, but don't burn yourself out. And then secondly, there is this relatively new role called an associate product manager, or even rotational product manager. And this is offered at a lot of medium-sized to large-sized tech firms. Even some smaller startups offer this. And what it is it's a role where you do not need any prior product management experience. They take new grads, they take, former teachers. They're incredible programs. So, do some Google searching and find companies that are hiring for that role.
A few questions off of those tips. Like, what do you think of courses and programs? Like, whether they're on Coursera, General Assembly, like these sort of programs, do they help you actually break in?
Yeah, I have strong opinions about this too. So I actually think that they are, I did a General Assembly boot camp while I was at Postmates. And what it gave me was the clarity and the confidence that I needed to advocate for one, to know that product management was right for me,
Right.
you know, going back
The
to my first point.
Yep.
Yep. But two, it gave me a portfolio piece, going to my second point about, you know, having a side project or something, you know, start doing product management. The boot camp through General Assembly has you actually develop an app. So again, no substitute for actually just rolling up my sleeves and just building something. So it helped me with that. But third, my TA ended up being someone who I really clicked with and who was hiring. So if I wasn't able to transfer at Postmates, I had another sort of into that role and into that function. So again, this is all dependent on the person, and you're going to get out what you put in to any of these boot camps. And they can be expensive. So again, it's all up to yourself. You know, if you can take 20% of your time and start working on a side project without doing a boot camp, oh my gosh, amazing. Do that.
Right. So I love the phrase portfolio piece. I mean, I've never heard that before, but I personally think it's very important for all of us to really think about, you know, my portfolio piece is the Touch MBA podcast, right? It exists for y'all to see what I do and if I'm good at it or not. And the same way you build that portfolio piece for being a product manager, like that first app or that first project. The question I have that I've seen from other people here is like, how much does the size of the company affect the hiring, right? So like, whether it's early stage, like a seed stage company versus Facebook, right? Will Facebook hire someone with no product management experience versus, you know, a startup? Like, if you can kind of give us your thoughts, you know, as you are in the epicenter of all that right now.
Absolutely. I'd say it's not impossible to become a product manager at a small startup. The reason it's not possible, the reason I know it's not impossible is I did it, but it is a lot harder because they have, you know, less specialization and like less resources to spend on onboarding someone that has no experience in it. Whereas larger tech firms like Facebook, Google, they almost all have institutionalized rotational product management programs that accept, you know, 200 of these rotational product managers or more in a given like 6-month cycle. And it's very formalized. It's like a formalized pipeline, a formalized application. And so the process is a lot clearer and there's a lot more support once you get into that program. Whereas at Postmates, I was really just scrambling to learn and it was like being thrown into the fire. So
yeah, you had to be a lot more scrappy. But those formalized programs for, are they for MBAs? I mean, like, or pre-MBAs, or does it not matter?
The only eligibility requirement that I'm aware of is that they are for people with no prior product management experience.
Oh, interesting.
So you can actually be, you know, older from the military and apply to the rotational product management program and get in at Facebook. So the age range, you know, the age totally ranges. There are new grads, there are folks coming from the military. The only eligibility requirement is that, you know, you have not done product management before.
Got it. And last question on this product management space. Are there any, like, is there a thought leader or an influencer that you would really suggest people follow in the space?
I have two that I really strongly recommend. The first is Shreyas. So if you go on Twitter and you search for Shreyas Doshi,
how do you spell that? That's a tough one.
It's SHREYAS. And last name is Doshi, Doshi. He's one of the most prolific writers on product management. He's, you know, he previously a product leader at Stripe, Twitter, Google, like early Yahoo. And he's just, again, prolific writer. He tweets multiple times a day about product management. So definitely follow Shreyas. And then the second person, her name is Ami Vora. So pretty easy name, AMIV as in Victor, ORA. And Ami is, she's a product leader at WhatsApp. And she is also a prolific writer on career growth and product management, how to become a product manager. She's incredible.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for sharing those. It's always a shortcut to hear, you know, what's inspiring people. All right. So in this final kind of part of our chat, I want to talk about your plans
Yes.
moving forward with Haas, and kind of like, because it's fascinating because you're 8 weeks away or something like that, right?
Yep.
From starting. And
Yep.
so first I'd like to talk about kind of like all these projects you've been working on for the past 6 months to a year. And then second question is, what's the plan of attack? Like what's your mindset? What are you thinking about? And have you met your classmates? So let's first start with a little context. Like, tell us a bit more about, you told us about Junie. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing with First Round Capital and Quick Art?
Yes. So yes, we talked about Junie. I'll talk a bit about First Round Capital. So First Round Capital invests in startups. They're an investment firm, but they also support operators in established companies that are underrepresented minorities. So just to give a concrete example, there are team members on the Pinterest growth team that identify as underrepresented minorities, and there are some folks at the within Pinterest that applied to be part of the First Round advising network as a mentee, and I signed up to be a mentor, and I got matched with someone on the Pinterest growth team, and I got to work with them on some of the growth challenges that they were dealing with, both personal growth challenges, but also so the person I worked with, I won't share their name, but they were a product designer with a couple years of work experience, and I was really helping them think through their career goals, how to grow as a product designer. And like, it was a great fit because working as a product manager, like I partnered really closely with product designers throughout the last 7 years. So this is the program that they provide, is this incredible program for people that want to get plugged into startup advising. Like if you have some concrete skill like product management, you can work with startup founders and then also these team members in more established companies.
Yeah. Wow. And then currently, before we started recording, you mentioned that you're helping a CEO of a startup.
Yes.
So what is your engagement there, and like, is that going to continue into your MBA?
It will not. It's just a 9-week engagement. It's a 9-week part-time engagement, and it's this pre-MBA internship, and I'm doing air quotes for anyone listening on audio. So like, listen. So anyone who's going to be an entrepreneur, like their MBA curriculum and free time looks very different from someone who's doing. Let's say, they want to do consulting. Absolutely. Because the recruiting process looks completely different. Oftentimes, if you're going for entrepreneurship, you don't do an internship at all. Your summer internship is really working on your startup. So when I sat down with myself and thought, like, what's the best way to spend my summer? I was a little torn on, should I just spend 100% of my time getting started on customer interviews for my startup and just start to validate the problem space and really start to build the MVP. That was one choice. But then this other choice that came up was I could start to like peel back the layers of what it's like to be a founder. And this opportunity came to me through a conversation I had with one of the general partners at Skydeck. I was sharing that I was about to be a Berkeley Haas student, and I was going to be a founder. So I wanted to establish some connections with Skydeck. And they mentioned that one of their promising portfolio companies, QuickCart, that they invested in, like needed help for the summer. And I thought, wow, what a great way to learn how to be a CEO is like work with a CEO for the next 9 weeks.
Amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll be sure to link to like the Berkeley Skydeck and all that, so people can see more about how, that program. So what's your plan of attack? Like, yes. Or do you even have a, I mean, yeah.
I mean,
that first semester is going to be crazy.
The first semester is going to be crazy. I'm going to be acclimating back to an academic environment, and we're all going to be feeling out like, everyone takes their MBA and they design their own adventure, because some people really are looking to become like a Baker Scholar and be in the top 5% of their class. And that's so admirable. I have to say, like, my approach is a little more practical. What I'm trying to do academically is to fill in the areas that I don't have the skills in today that I think will help me as a founder. So very specifically, user acquisition and sort of growth marketing is this incredibly important skill set as a founder that when you work at a large tech firm, you don't get experience with user acquisition unless you're on the user acquisition team. So for me, I worked on the Messenger product, which already had over 1 billion customers, like 1.5 billion customers. And so I actually didn't have to learn about the front part of product-led growth, which is this really interesting area. And there are so many classes at Berkeley Haas. There's one called MBA 290T is called growth hacking that I'm so excited to take. And there are more classes that have to do with growth marketing that I'm really excited about. And so I'd say that my general plan of attack is honing in on what do I need as a founder that I did not get exposure to during the last 7 years. So things like, HR and finance, like knowing how to develop and maintain a balance sheet. So I'm really looking at it in a very practical way.
Which I love to hear that. And like, are there any like clubs or events that you kind of have your eye on?
Yeah, there is like one really tangible kind of way I want to contribute to the community. In terms of competitions, the competition that I want to apply for and prepare for is it's called PAD 13. It's part of Skydeck, and it's for full-time Berkeley students, whether it's undergrad or graduate students. And that, I believe the applications are due sometime in the winter. So I will be preparing for, those applications. But in terms of ways I want to contribute to the community, you can probably guess it. It's helping people that want to become product managers. So helping my classmates that are, recruiting for product management. That's going to be one of the main ways I give back. Again, it's a pretty, practical lens that I'm looking at that with. It's one of the biggest ways I think I can give back is create a playbook for people. What are the best practices? Who are the right people to follow? What are the best associate product manager internships? Like, I can help people get their foot in the door. And that's one way I really want to give back.
Love that. And I just want to like highlight what you just said, like how concrete of an example that is in terms of contribution that you guys can really start thinking about, as you're developing your MBA applications. That's such a concrete way, Bridget can help her classmates, and what is going to be your way, right, to contribute to your class, and always keep that front of mind in your applications. Bridget, this has been awesome. I definitely am going to book you for a second or third, because I think it's really fun to kind of track, right? Maybe let's try to do one after the first year and then one after the second year. I would really love to keep on if you have the time. And I think our listeners would too. I just want to give you the floor, like any last thoughts to kind of impart, your hard-earned, all the hours you put into the application process. Like, you've listened to a lot of these episodes, so you kind of know what we're about. Like, any last thoughts you could give this year's class that's applying this fall?
Yeah, I would say there are two main things I would share. So the first is, don't self-select out of the process. I didn't believe that getting into Harvard or Wharton or a full ride to Haas, I didn't believe that was possible for me. And it was only through, 2 years of hard work and just persistence that I was able to achieve it. And if I can do it, then you can do it. And I promise you, there's nothing special or different about any of the people getting into, okay, that's a hyperbole, but you can do it. That's what I want to say. Don't self-select out. Believe in yourself, really go for it. And then the second is, a lot of people will tell you that getting an MBA is not needed for your career path. and don't listen to them. Know yourself, really get clear on what you want to do in your career, and let that be your guide. Really, I had to tune out all of the noise and really just get clear on what I wanted out of the MBA, and really actually ask the question of, can the MBA give me what I want?
Exactly.
And once you answer that question for yourself, that's all that matters.
I love that. We'll let that point sit. Bridget, thank you so much for again coming on the show. Congratulations on the hard work you put in and the results, obviously, and wishing you an amazing first year at Berkeley Haas. And keep us posted with whatever company you end up starting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck everybody out there.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Remember, you can get free school selection help and a profile review at touchmba.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just search for